Hi there, I'm Beth, and this week I want to share with you one of the projects that I've been working on in the background since around the start of March. It was somewhat prompted by a birthday present I received in January of a green machine setting tool, one of those more heavyweight tools used for setting eyelets and snap fastenings and the like. My husband was really keen to see me using it, and he suggested we make some smart doll jeans to sell just to get some practice at using it for the snap fastening enclosure at the front. So, although he doesn't sew himself, he wanted to help as much as he could and hang out with me as we spent some time each weekend making different types of jeans in different ways to eventually offer for sale. To begin with, I was only using recycled jeans fabric and adding extra textures and distressing at the end, though eventually we did purchase some lightweight chambray fabric to use as well. I especially enjoyed these shorts and jeans that we went all out in distressing, using sandpaper and paint to add loads of wear and tear to the fronts and backs of each pair. I think they look wonderful, like artists' clothes. There was a bit of trial and error in getting the metal 8mm snap fastening to connect just right. They're really tiny, and if the positioning was off, then they just fell apart. But when they did work, they are really secure, and all of my snaps have now been tested many times to be sure they're just right. I figured since jeans are one of those staple wardrobe pieces that I've made many times, that today I would try out a pattern that I hadn't used yet and show you how I put it together. The pattern I've chosen is the free men's jeans pattern direct from the Smart Doll website. The pattern is very similar to the ladies' jeans, but the pocket pattern style in this one I know has stumped a few of my sewing friends, so I thought it was good to go over. Again, I'm using pre-used and very well pre-washed denim from old jeans, so there will be very little stain risk. I'm paying attention to the grain lines marked on the pattern pieces, especially because this denim has quite a strong visual grain on its right side. There are a few things I like to do differently, one of which is leaving about a belt loop's length extra in the belt loop piece to make them slightly longer in the end. I use light coloured cotton for the lining parts, the pocket bags and the belt lining. I just have to pay attention to which way round I cut this piece because it's not symmetrical, and I usually mark a left and right end. I thought I would make a couple of extra template pieces for the back pockets as well, cutting lightweight card to the size of the finished pocket so I can trace that outline accurately onto the fabric for folding. And another template piece to let me trace the decorative stitching line accurately each time onto the pocket too. I like to cut the pocket outline away from the back trousers piece so I can draw the outline directly where the pocket needs to go. I use heat erasable pen to transfer the front fly markings, taking note of which go on the left and which go on the right. I also like to mark the stitching line for the crotch onto the wrong side of the doll's left piece, so it's nice and clear to see before everything's all stitched and folded up. I have two sewing machines set up. One of them has white thread and uses my overlocking foot to overlock all the edges I need. And the other usually has a white bobbin thread and a coloured thread in top. Before I start putting pieces together, I overlock all the edges that can be done in advance. Today I'm starting with the back pockets, top stitching the decorative line in orange, and then folding over the top edge with some double-sided quilting tape to hold it in place before I double top stitch the top edge. I also prepare the pocket patches, stitching them onto the lining fabric like this. The lining will be folded back against itself like this once sewn into the jeans. I'll fold the belt loop strip into itself like this and will top stitch 2 parallel rows from the right side. I then like to fold the strip onto itself, creating 5 layers, which I can simply snip, creating the 5 belt loops needed. I've really gotten used to using this 1/4 inch double-sided dissolvable quilting tape. It's so handy for holding seams in place. I put a strip along each bottom edge of the back pockets, then I fold both edges over simultaneously, letting my fingertips pinch a little fold at the bottom point. I can then push that to the left or the right, and I find it gives me a really nice, consistent shape for the pockets. I can then tape and tuck over the left and right edges too. Don't forget to add a tiny folded ribbon for a little extra detail on the right back pocket. I can use the traced outline to position the pocket correctly and then top stitch it directly into place. Next, I attach the 2 back yoke pieces, being careful to have the largest edges towards the inside. I'll stitch them, overlock the hem, press it upwards and top stitch from the right side. We should have a nice curved shape afterwards. Again, I'm careful to have only the white bobbin thread showing on the inside to avoid staining risk. I bring the 2 back centre seams together, stitching and overlocking, and turning to one side before top stitching. Coming back to the front pockets, I align the pocket curve with the patch and jeans right sides facing. I'll stitch along the curve, then snip into the seam allowance before turning the pocket lining towards the inside. I top stitch this seam twice. Then on the inside, there are a couple of different ways to finish off the pocket bag. The bottom can be closed either just by top stitching and overlocking like this, or it can be folded around the other way and stitched so we have a nice folded edge when it's turned back out. And that's the way I usually like to do it. I like to leave the top and side of the pocket open for the time being, and I make sure I remember to top stitch 2 parallel lines for the fake fly on the left side. Next, I'm going to line up the front and back trouser pieces along their side seams. I start by clipping or pinning each end of the seam, and then work my way up the leg towards the pocket area, where I then make sure all the edges sit nice and flat as I secure them. I then stitch the seam, making sure my white bobbin thread lies on the front jeans side so that the coloured thread is hidden when the seam is overlocked and pressed towards the back. Lately, and certainly for Smart Doll clothes, I've taken to trimming the seam allowance before I overlock it to get a really nice, neat finish. Obviously something you wouldn't need to do if you were using an overlocker that could cut it as it goes. Once the side seams are folded towards the back, they get top stitched. I mark the fold line on the trouser hems and then overlock and top stitch each leg. I don't always do it this way, but today I've marked the belt loop positions onto the belt piece. I clip them all into place, and then I attach the longer outer curve of the belt to the jeans waistline. On the left side, the fly front is folded in more than on the right side. I've transferred the markings from the pattern to get this nice and accurate. The belt should overlap this fold by 1/4 inch. Likewise on the other side, the edge is folded and the belt overlaps it. The center belt and waist are matched, and the rest is evenly dispersed, taking care to have the pocket top clipped into place as well. I make sure everything's pinned evenly and that the belt loops will face the right way up when flipped upward. And I can then stitch along the seam. I don't overlock this edge, but it can be trimmed to reduce some bulkiness. I top stitch with the seam allowance pressed upwards, and while I have the jeans open and flat, I decided to attach a few rivets for some extra detail. I picked these silver rivets up in my recent trip to Poland at a fantastic fabric warehouse. They are a perfect size for doll clothes. I come back to the belt loops then, folding them upwards and making sure they're nice and straight. I align the belt lining piece, making sure the left side and right sides are paired together. I've overlocked the bottom edge of the lining and will only be sewing along the sides and top of this piece. At each end of the belt lining, I like to tuck the seam allowance upward and start sewing from this edge here. Although the rest of the lining will hang straight down, this gives a nice clean edge at the front closure. I trim the corners and cut snips into the seam allowance before turning the lining toward the inside of the jeans, pressing and securing it with some fusible hemming tape. Here, the lining has been ironed down and it covers the other seam allowance nicely. With the two folded edges unfolded so they don't get caught in the seam, the front crotch seam is then lined up and stitched along the line that I marked earlier from the pattern. When it's turned right side out, the front closure should have a slight overlap. Before closing the final seam, I carefully top stitch up the center front seam, up and along the top of the waistband, catching each belt loop as I pass, and then all the way back down and into the other front seam. I was a little too excited to use my green machine again, and I installed my snaps before top stitching the belt, but this should really be done the other way round. I really do love these tiny snap fastenings. Our last task is to close the trouser legs around the inside. I line them up and stitch them, trim the seam allowance and then overlock it, leaving long threads on either end, which I can then attach to a hand needle and use to neatly fold the ends of the seam allowance towards the back of the jeans. This little touch really helps the trouser legs to sit nicely, and if you have the patience, I also recommend ironing the inner seam towards the back as well. And with that, we have a finished pair of men's jeans. They have a really nice long leg and bootcut style. Although I've used old denim, I want to take things a little further and try bleach distressing and sandpapering the jeans to make them look used and more authentic. I found a couple of plastic tubes about the right size to scrunch the jeans up against, and I put a diluted bleach solution into a little spray bottle. I sprayed it while the jeans were scrunched up, so hopefully it will give them a scale-appropriate wrinkled look. Once the jeans have been bleached and thoroughly rinsed, I left them to dry, scrunched up on the tubes again. I even clipped a couple of areas to have them dry wrinkled. The final touch I'll add to them is to use this rotary tool sanding attachment to rough up the knees and other stress points of the jeans. You can use just a regular piece of sandpaper for this. With a little extra work with a scalpel and pulling at some threads, this is my final look for these distressed men's jeans. What do you think of them? Of course, these aren't the only jeans I've made to sell. In addition to the paint splattered ones you saw at the start of the video, I've also designed my own classic baggy skater style shorts. I really loved how these first ones came out, and I will be making some more in different colours when I get a chance. I especially like the little leather label I added onto the back of these. Here's a better look at the paint splattered classic shorts modelled on our lovely Cortex girl. And finally for today, there are two pairs of black chambray jeans for pair. These were both prototype pieces for a new trousers pattern that I've created for an upcoming commission. One fits a little looser than the other, but they're both fully finished and overlocked inside, and they will be available on my website, bethramsden.com, along with all the others. I'd like to welcome my newest Patreon member, BT Bop, and say a thank you to all my patrons for their support over there. I hope you've all enjoyed watching today's look into my studio, have enjoyed seeing how I made these lovely tiny jeans. I'll have all the jeans shown today listed on my website with worldwide shipping available, so please check them out at bethramsden.com. The link is in the description, so treat yourself or your smart dolls to a pair. Thank you all so much for watching. Please leave a like on the video if you've enjoyed it, and a comment below too, please. I love to hear your feedback. Take care of each other, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.